All right. Hello, everybody. Today we have with us Tarek Maassarani. And Tarek is affiliated with a variety of universities, including Eastern Mennonite University, where he served as a visiting professor, as well as Georgetown and American University, where he teaches as an adjunct and supports RJ implementation. As a peace and justice practitioner with Palestinian, Jewish, Israeli, and Lebanese family, Tarek has worked on the Israeli-Palestinian conflict for nearly 2 decades, and he has also worked extensively in religious peace building. And today, we're going to talk a little bit about the current Israeli-Palestinian conflict and how campuses respond to the conflict and how we can incorporate religion and reconciliation. So Tarek, thank you so much for being here with us today. I'm looking forward to this conversation.
Thank you. I am as well.
Thank you. So can we, just to get us started, can you tell us about yourself and your experience working on this conflict?
Sure. So as mentioned, I have family that comes from the Middle East. My mom's side of the family is Lebanese. My grandmother, actually, as a German Jew, left Germany in the 30s to get away from the rise of Nazi Germany. They all came together with my grandmother living in Lebanon for 37 years of her life. And so my mother had a Jewish mother, a Muslim father, and went to Catholic nun school. I myself grew up outside of Lebanon, although with Lebanese citizenship and a Lebanese family. I was always very curious what was going on there. A lot of doors opened for me when I decided to spend some time doing a legal internship over summer of law school, where I worked with both an Israeli women's organization and a Palestinian women's organization on putting the terms of reference together for a women's commission to the peace process at the time. That was the roadmap negotiations that were happening. And with that came also the opportunity to get around, and I made a film that explored themes around that conflict and showcased various different voices that are not so often heard. From then, I spent a good amount of time working with Seeds of Peace, which is a camp that brings adolescents and community leaders into dialogue in a sort of US summer camp kind of environment. So a lot of dialogue, facilitation around that, and also supporting more regionally or locally Israeli Palestinians and internationals connect in a particular project that is possibly the most meaningful thing I've ever been a part of. It's a very grassroots center for social and environmental sustainability that was a refuge for Palestinians and Israelis to come together, learn about each other. Some of what we did there was workshops, intensives around a model known as nonviolent communication, which was an amazing tool for deepening those relationships and bringing about understanding of these disparate realities, and then moving forward into action and taking action. And so those were some of my experiences that I've gotten to have around that conflict.
Thank you so much. I really appreciate you sharing that. And before we take a deeper dive into the 3 recommendations you have towards how campuses can respond to the current conflict, let's touch a little bit on your religion and reconciliation guide. So what is reconciliation and how does religion play a role in it?
Yeah, so let me frame a little bit before I get into the substance of the guide. The Religious Reconciliation Guide is one of 4 guides that are part of a religious peace-building series of action guides. They're meant to be practitioner-focused, useful, practical, published by the U.S. Institute of Peace in collaboration with the Network for Religious and Traditional Peacemakers and the Salam Institute. I was a director for the Salam Institute for about 5 or 6 years. We did religious peace building work. A lot of it was in the Sahel North Africa, and the Levant, Middle East region. The Islam Institute itself focused a lot on Muslim communities and then relationships between Muslim and non-Muslim communities in those various contexts. The action guides were inspired by the realization by many peacebuilding practitioners that religion plays a huge role in conflict, but there's a, particularly in Western US and quote unquote secular countries, there's a fear and a discomfort about bringing religion into analysis, bringing religion into implementation of programs. And so it was intended to bring religion into those spaces, more knowledge about religion, and particularly to shift the preconception that a lot of people have that religion is largely a driver of conflict, and to show how much religion can be a source of peace building. So that's the motive behind the project. Took about 8 years to publish these 4 action guides from a cross section of different authors working together, many of them practitioners in the field, and a variety of different input channels with practitioners globally in order to bring them together. I'm very proud of the project, and all 4 guides are available for free on the USIP Religious Peacebuilding website. So now to get to your question about what is reconciliation. So one of those 4 guides was on religion and reconciliation. The other guides are on mediation, gender, and conflict analysis. So just sort of like to be able to situate. So we looked at reconciliation as a process of moving from a state of ruptured relationship, turmoil, war, violence, although it doesn't have to be overt physical violence, right, to a place and a direction of improved relationships. The way that Indigenous folks have often called it is in the direction of right relationship. And so it really looks at, in part, the human and social psychology that we need to understand for people to move past horrors, trauma, pain, and also certain kinds of worldviews or perceptions of the other, to a place where new narratives, new identities, and new hope can lead society. One thing that the guide does is all 4 guides look at different components of religion, which is very useful. Instead of thinking of religion just as one thing, we look at religion as both a set of beliefs in one aspect. We look at religion as a source of identity or belonging or community in another aspect. We look at religion as a set of rituals and symbols. That's a 3rd aspect. We look at religion as an institution. That's a 4th aspect. And we look at religion as an experience, as spirituality as a 5th aspect. Once you break it down into different aspects, you can see that religion may be a source of violence in one aspect, but a source of peace building in another aspect. So that's one of the benefits of breaking down religion into its different dimensions. And that's true for reconciliation as well. So some ideas may be very useful to promote a reconciliation process, whereas possibly some symbols of religion may be counterproductive. And so as a peace-building practitioner, being able to understand and use the different elements of religion in a way that promotes, that connects in reconciliation, and avoid using those that would detract from it. And I'll just add for reconciliation, yeah, we broke down reconciliation in a set of processes and levels. They don't necessarily happen linearly, but if you're familiar with restorative justice, we have sort of a set of processes that we go through, steps. They don't always happen linearly, but there is some kind of sequence to that. Similarly, we do that with reconciliation. The difference being is that we're encompassing reconciliation on social levels, social scales, large social historical conflicts. And so that's where we have an interpersonal level, right? We have an inner level, we have an interpersonal level, we have an intergroup level, and then we have the larger social institutional level. So what does it mean, if you think about reconciliation, to go past an interpersonal harm and to think about it in the context of a group, and then even more widely in the context of a state, where that's happening. So you'll see in the reconciliation guide that there are things like public truth-telling and memorialization elements that you might not be familiar with as a restorative justice practitioner, but that actually feed into similar ideas in restorative justice around acknowledgement, for example.
Thank you for that. I think one of the other questions I had personally, because I'm into transitional justice, and I think like this memorialization aspect of it is really important. And even with the current conflict, this is one of the things I read in your guide. How do we memorialize the past and actively focus on our work in the present right now? How does that kind of work? How do we create that balance?
Yeah, so so maybe just to back up, part of memorialization, it's that step of the process where there's an acknowledgement that is backed by the legitimacy or credibility that a state or a large-scale institution can give to something, right? And it's that thing that gives the people who have been harmed in a conflict, in a large-scale conflict, the assurance that they're seen, that they're considered, that they matter. And it's something that's memorialized oftentimes because we're talking about conflicts that might be historical, intergenerational. They just have such a size that we're talking about whole societies, possibly millions of people who are involved. And it's a memorial that can kind of give expression to the voices of those who were in the conflict, who were victim to the conflict, in ways that would be similar to a smaller scale process where someone would just speak or maybe create an art piece to share with others in a circle. So that's the memorialization piece. It's memorialization is a process, though. It's not just an outcome. And memorializing something, I think some of the most beautiful work in reconciliation has been when folks decide they want to create a memorial and they work together. And it's that process of creating the memorial that allows for some really deep digging into what happened and how people are making meaning out of it. And all of that takes time. So with reference to an active live conflict, something that's present with us now, I don't think there's much space for that memorialization process to happen. What's important now, if we're talking about the war that's happening in Israel-Palestine, very much so, it's to try to avoid the ongoing escalation, the violence and the killing, and then to create the space for a reconciliation process once the violence has been addressed in all its various forms.
Yeah, thank you so much for that. Yeah, that's really important. And maybe now is a good time for us to look at the three recommendations you have in terms of how campuses respond to this conflict. So maybe if you can give our audience a little bit of a summary behind your process of like coming up with these three recommendations, and then if you can outline them to us.
Yeah. So this framework came to me in the middle of the night after having spent some time keeping a circle at a local university and talking with staff and faculty about the tensions that were bubbling up. And it essentially takes some of the learnings from the Religion and Reconciliation Guide that I mentioned, as well as some core ideas from restorative justice, and brings it together into this mix based on my experiences working in educational higher ed institutions. So there's really sort of three levels or largely steps, phases, if you will. The first one has to do with what is often the most immediate concern, which is sort of basic safety and wellness that any university is going to want to care about for their community. So thinking about just like in a restorative justice, you want to make sure that participants aren't in an active conflict, in an active state of receiving or giving harm. And so how are you ensuring that there might be that separation, that cooling that space? Some of the ideas, around that is certainly offering mental health and other support services, disseminating information about those, offering accommodations to students who are in crisis, developing and communicating safety plans if there are threats to safety that are rumored or circulating on campus, reaching out individually to check in on the most vulnerable students and staff and providing more individualized support to them. And I think also creating some kind of anonymous feedback or tip line, so something that both allows for the university to get feedback on threats that people might be perceiving, as well as on ways that the university's response may or may not be serving their needs for safety and well-being. So that's sort of in the immediate term. In the more middle term, in the medium term span of the coming weeks, which is maybe where we are now as it relates to the war between Hamas and Israel, there we're talking about the processing spaces. This is where you're helping those members of the community who are affected process the very difficult emotions they are, find community around that. So setting up affinity spaces, affinity process, the circle approach can be a great instrument for making that. Some of those can be religious and some of those can be secular spaces and processes, right? There is a lot of role for religion to play, not just because the conflict has religious undertones that we're talking about, but because people oftentimes in the most extreme forms of mental and physical, emotional anguish can find meaning and support in their faith beliefs. Also supporting dedicating office hours for willing staff or student leaders to be able to discuss the situation and its personal impacts. And then, promoting self-care techniques that students can use on the day-to-day over time. And I love in universities, there's a rich tradition of flyering, and in bathroom stalls included, you'll have flyers that can promote well-being, and so I see that there's space there to help promote self-care techniques. And then there's the longer term, and this is really where reconciliation comes into play. This is bringing up tensions and conflicts. It's bringing up clashes of worldviews. It's bringing up biases and misconceptions and prejudices right to the surface. And so in the longer term, when there's enough of the emotional processing that's allowed, the basic safety and well-being of individuals has been tended to, then we can talk about organizing facilitated dialogues for students and other community members, public storytelling events, possibly a memorialization event, joint speaking events, basically where you can bring in folks who represent the different communities that are most directly affected and model what it looks like to be in constructive dialogue with each other. Spaces for memorializing in terms of permanent or temporary art and expression. And of course, taking action. Many student groups have been active on Middle East peace issues for some time, and will continue to be, and supporting them in an effort to help mobilize and channel a lot of the attention and the energy that this current war has elicited into further action, something that's constructive, which can mean a lot. For me, I've been very deeply impacted by the tragedies that have unfolded since October 7th, which happens to be my birthday. And I found for me, being able to take action, which has included, these kinds of thinking or supporting universities, as well as reaching out to loved ones, as well as writing Congress, and those kinds of actions have helped me process my own emotions through these very difficult times.
Thank you, Tarek. This has been really helpful to hear, and I like the progression of how these three recommendations have been divided. Like there's the immediate response, and then there's what you do over the coming weeks, and then over the coming months. So moving from ensuring the safety to the emotional process support, and then the dialogue and reconciliation that needs to take place. This is all really useful, and I think there's a very big restorative justice element to it, which I think that's the beauty of it. And I love that you have that there. Yeah, thank you so much. Yeah, and then another question I had was to do with how universities, because sometimes an ongoing campus debate is, should a university issue a statement in times like this that either show solidarity towards one of the two groups, right? And this model is more focusing on how universities can actually respond more proactively towards a conflict. What thoughts do you have on this current debates within universities and issuing statements, and how might this even be an alternative, if at all?
There's I have been following dozens and dozens of different statements that have been issued by universities, by organizations, by governments, by the President of the United States, and paying really close attention to the wide variety of statements that have come out. I would say there are those statements who fall into the category of a very unconditional support or allyship with one side. They tend to make big sweeping claims that are not in a context, I think the value in that particular statement is that it does give the ally a sense of being understood in the language of sort of in-group identity, in-group politics, support politics. The unfortunate cost of a statement like that is it furthers a divide, and particularly if coming from an academic institution, it discourages the kind of critical thinking and contextual thinking to really understand what's going on. And it could have the effect that those who hold different opinions and perspectives in the community feel less welcome, feel less at home. We need to remember that when we're on a campus or anywhere, the people that are there on campus are not directly responsible for any of the violence or deaths that have happened. In fact, even if you're in the Middle East right now, the people who are directly responsible and making decisions that are leading to the deaths are very few. I try to remind myself of that I'm dealing with people who might have different opinions and perspectives, but I'm not dealing with the people who are directly and knowingly harmed people that I love. So what to do with statements? I mean, I have come across statements that have really inspired me because they do take a stance along values and rights, but they do so in a way that for me seems authentic and consistent. Sometimes they make reference to statements or values, a mission that had already preceded this particular crisis we're in, right? So it's not new. Like it's not just a reaction to what's happening now. It's something that they've grounded themselves on earlier. And some of that could be, like Jesuit values in the case of Jesuit institutions, and other values. I've been very inspired by statements that break down the almost immediate knee-jerk polarization between national religious identities, and actually bring people together to to recognize them, that there are really like military elites, whether they're Palestinian or Israeli, and then there's a whole swath of civilians who are facing the consequences of policy decisions that have been made over weeks to years to decades. And that seems to me like much more of a relevant dichotomy to be looking at, rather than these tribal identity groups. And so statements that help us see that there are different ways to understand who is who in this group, that encourage us to see beyond the immediate tribal identity groups, and to start to see the nuance that allows us to see where power is being held and used within a society, within a political structure. I also find it, the statements that have resonated very strongly for me are those statements that are personal.
Mm-hmm.
The statements from people in leadership or whoever in the institution, who express the feelings that they are going through, that are probably an echo of what so many others are going through. And sometimes those feelings may have anger into them. Sometimes they have a grief and despair in them. And I think partly what a statement can do, has the power to do, is to show that you are not just an institution, that to show that you're part of a community, and that you're not alone in what is a very difficult emotional time. So that the kind of humanizing language of personal vulnerability, personal connection to what is going on, how it affects one, I think is very powerful, and is very much in line with what we do in restorative justice, where it's the storytelling of our own experiences and the impacts we have that teaches us the lessons that we need to learn.
Wow, thank you so much. That was very well put. This has been really phenomenal. I've appreciated the chance to talk with you and really hone in on how we can work towards this conflict right now. Yeah, thank you. I appreciate you being here, Tarek, and I hope our audience is able to listen and get the advice and work on this actively. So I really appreciate the opportunity. Thank you.
Yes. Well, for everyone who is listening on this, first and foremost, just take care of yourself. These are really difficult times. And it's for me, there have been moments where I've just needed to be amongst my close loved ones to process what's going on before I can step back out into the world and try to offer some form of leadership, some capacity to lead or model anything. So yeah, love yourself, and let's see how we can use this as the motivation for a really true sustainable peace in the Middle East.
Thank you, Tarek. Yeah. All right.